It is 3:10 in the afternoon on Friday, May 31st, 1889. In a quiet valley in the Allegheny Mountains of western Pennsylvania, 14 miles above the steel town of Johnstown, an earthen dam holding back 20 million tons of water finally gives way. Within 57 minutes, a wall of water 60 feet high, moving at 40 miles an hour with the force of Niagara Falls, will erase entire towns from the map. 2,209 people are about to die. 99 entire families. 396 children under the age of 10. The dam that killed them was owned by Andrew Carnegie. It was owned by Henry Clay Frick, by Andrew Mellon, by the men who built modern America. And by the time the sun rises tomorrow, none of them will spend a single day in jail. This is the story of the South Fork Dam, the deadliest day in American civilian history until September 11, 2001. And the woman who lost everything while the men who killed her family sailed home to their yachts. Her name was Anna Fenn. Anna was 35 years old that morning, born in Richmond, Virginia, to Irish immigrants Stephen and Barbara Sullivan. She had married John Fenn 12 years earlier. John was a tinsmith, a small, wiry man with sandy hair and ink-stained fingers from doing his own books. They lived at 223 Locust Street in Johnstown, a modest two-story wooden house across from the Methodist Church. John ran a hardware store 9 blocks away. Pots, pans, sheet iron, stovepipes, anything you needed for a working family kitchen. They had 7 children. That morning, May 31st, 1889, all 9 of them were alive. By sundown, only Anna would be. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the dam. The South Fork Dam was originally built in 1853, an earthen embankment 72 feet high and 931 feet long, built by the state of Pennsylvania to hold water for a canal system. When railroads made canals obsolete, the dam fell into disuse. It failed once in 1862. The Pennsylvania Railroad bought it, repaired it cheaply, and walked away. Then, in 1879, a group of wealthy Pittsburgh men bought the property. They called it the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The membership list reads like a roster of Gilded Age America. Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King who built half of Pittsburgh. Henry Clay Frick, Carnegie's coke partner, the man who would later crush the Homestead steel strike with Pinkerton guns. Andrew Mellon, banker, future Secretary of the Treasury under 3 presidents. Philander Knox, attorney, future U.S. Senator, future Secretary of State. 61 men in total. Together they were worth more than the gross domestic product of most European countries. They wanted a private lake, somewhere quiet to fish for bass and entertain their wives. So they raised the dam back to its original height to deepen the water. They built a clubhouse, 16 private cottages around the shore, a boathouse for their yachts. But to build it, they made changes to the dam. They removed the cast iron discharge pipes, the only way to lower the water level in an emergency. Sold them for scrap. They lowered the dam crest by 3 feet to widen it into a road for their carriages. They installed iron screens across the spillway. The official reason was to keep their stocked fish from escaping downstream. The actual effect was to clog the spillway with debris during heavy rain. In other words, they took an old dam and made it weaker, lower, and unable to release water in an emergency. A civil engineer named John Fulton inspected the dam in 1880 on behalf of the Cambria Iron Company in Johnstown. He wrote a formal warning. The dam, he said, may give way at any time and cause great loss of life and property. The club's response was a polite letter. They appreciated his concern. But the dam was perfectly safe. No further inspections were welcome. For 10 years, the people of Johnstown lived under 20 million tons of water, held back by a dam that the men who owned it refused to maintain. Children joked about it. If that dam ever breaks, they said, we'll all be swept away. It was the kind of joke you make about something you've stopped believing will actually happen. On May 28, 1889, a low-pressure system formed over Nebraska. By the time it crossed the Allegheny Mountains 2 days later, it had become the heaviest rainfall ever recorded in western Pennsylvania. 6 to 10 inches of rain in 24 hours. By the morning of May 31st, the lake behind the South Fork Dam was rising at the rate of 1 foot per hour. A young civil engineer named John Park happened to be staying at the club that morning, 23 years old, just out of college. He went to the dam at sunrise and saw immediately what was happening. Water was already topping the embankment in places. The clogged spillway couldn't drain fast enough. The dam was going to fail. Park rode his horse 14 miles in the pouring rain to South Fork Village. He found the telegraph operator, a man named Emma Ehrenfeld. "Send a warning to Johnstown," he said. "The dam is going to break." Ehrenfeld sent 2 telegrams. The lines were already failing from the storm. The first message reached Johnstown's railroad operator. He didn't pass it on. The dam, he said, had been about to break for 10 years. It never did. No need to alarm the public. The second telegram never arrived. The lines were down. At Anna Fenn's house on Locust Street, the morning had started normally. The streets were already flooded. Johnstown sat in a narrow valley where 2 rivers met, and spring floods were a fact of life. Anna and her older children moved the furniture and rugs to the second floor. They had done this many times before. John Fenn went to his hardware store at noon to move his merchandise to higher shelves. He came home for lunch, stayed for an hour, then went back to the store around 3 o'clock to bring food home since the cellar was already underwater. That was the last time Anna saw him. At 3:10 p.m., 14 miles upstream, the South Fork Dam gave way. Witnesses said it didn't break in pieces. The entire face of the dam pushed outward as one solid wall and then dissolved. 20 million tons of water, the equivalent flow of the Mississippi River for 36 minutes, poured into the narrow Conemaugh Valley below. The wave was 60 feet high, higher than a 6-story building, moving at 40 miles an hour. Within minutes, it picked up entire houses, barns, freight trains, locomotives, livestock, and people, and turned them all into a single moving mass of debris. A railroad engineer named John Hess saw the wave coming and tied his locomotive whistle down so it screamed continuously. He drove the engine ahead of the flood as long as he could to warn villages downstream. When the wave caught him, he jumped clear and ran for high ground. The locomotive was tossed end over end like a child's toy. The wave hit South Fork Village first, then Mineral Point, then East Conemaugh, then Woodvale. By the time it reached Johnstown at 4:07 p.m., it was no longer water. Survivors who saw it coming said it looked like a black mountain rolling toward them, a boiling, churning mass of mud and wreckage 35 feet high. Trees stripped of bark, houses flattened into kindling, horses and cattle drowning at the front of the wave. Human bodies tumbling on the surface. Anna Fenn was upstairs with her 7 children when she heard the rumble, like 100 trains running through the house at once. She had her 3-month-old baby in her arms. She told the older children to climb on the bed and the table, get higher, get higher. Then the water came through the windows. Her own words from the memoir she gave to the historian J.J. McLaurin a year later. "I had the baby in my arms. The other children climbed on the lounge and table. The water rushed through the doors and windows and caught us. Before we all got up, the water came up." The Fenn house broke apart around her. The roof tore loose. Anna found herself floating on it with her baby still in her arms. She could see her older children in the water around her, reaching for her, calling her name. She could not reach them. The roof carried her 16 miles downstream before she was finally pulled to safety by a farmer near Nineveh. Her baby was still alive. 6 of her 7 children were already dead. The 7th would be found 3 days later. Her husband John never made it home. A neighbor said he had gotten within 2 doors of the house when the wave struck. He shouted a goodbye to his family and was never seen alive again. His body was found 6 months later. The wave that destroyed Anna Fenn's family rolled on through downtown Johnstown. 4 square miles of city flattened in 10 minutes. 1,600 homes and 280 businesses gone. The Cambria Iron Works, the heart of Johnstown's economy, leveled. But the worst was still to come. The flood debris piled up against the Pennsylvania Railroad's stone bridge at the lower end of town. 7 stone arches that the wave couldn't break through. The debris formed a temporary dam 30 acres in size and 40 feet high. Houses, trees, broken furniture, oil tanks from a refinery upstream, freight cars, dead horses. And hundreds of people still alive, still clinging to whatever was floating. Then the debris caught fire. The oil from the refinery had soaked into everything. A spark from a coal stove or a burning lamp ignited it. The wreckage at the stone bridge burned for 3 days. 80 people who had survived the flood burned to death trapped in the wreckage that had saved them from drowning. When the fires finally went out, the work of counting the dead began. 2,209 bodies were eventually identified. 777 were never identified at all. Bodies were found as far away as Cincinnati, Ohio, 500 miles downstream. The last body was discovered in 1911, 22 years after the flood. 99 entire families wiped out. 124 women widowed. 198 men widowed. 98 children orphaned. 396 children under 10 dead. It was the largest single-day loss of civilian life in American history. It would hold that record for 112 years until September 11, 2001. Within hours, the news reached Pittsburgh. Within days, donations and volunteers were pouring into the valley from every state and 18 foreign countries. Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, arrived with 50 volunteers and stayed for 5 months. It was the Red Cross's first major disaster response. The organization that defines disaster relief in America today was forged in the mud of Johnstown. And then came the question, who did this? Within 48 hours, the answer was obvious to every newspaper in America. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, Carnegie, Frick, Mellon. The men who had taken a state-built dam, modified it for their private pleasure, and ignored a decade of warnings. The American Society of Civil Engineers appointed a committee to investigate. They visited the site. They reviewed the original engineering specifications. They documented every modification the club had made. Then they wrote a report that protected the wealthy men who had paid for it. The committee concluded that the dam might have failed even without the modifications. The rainfall, they said, was unprecedented, an act of God. No specific person could be held responsible. This was the legal cover the club needed. When survivors filed lawsuits, and many did, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was defended by the Pittsburgh law firm of Knox and Reed. Philander Knox and James Hay Reed. Both partners were members of the club. They were defending themselves. Their argument was simple. The flood was an act of God. American tort law required survivors to prove specific negligence by specific individuals. But which individual member of a 61-man club had personally caused the dam to fail? No one could say. Every lawsuit failed. Every single one. Anna Fenn filed a claim for $29,200 in damages. She received $3,410 from charity funds. Nothing from the club. Not a single member of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club paid $1 in legal damages for the deaths of 2,209 people. Not Carnegie, not Frick, not Mellon, not Knox. No one. Some of them did contribute privately to the relief fund. Henry Clay Frick gave several $1,000s. About half the club members donated something. Andrew Carnegie eventually built Johnstown a new public library. A library worth a fraction of what the club had spent on its private cottages. The library still stands today. The names of the dead it memorializes do not appear on the building. This was not the first time wealthy men had killed an American town through a private dam and walked away clean. 15 years earlier, on May 16, 1874, the Mill River Dam in western Massachusetts had failed. It killed 139 people. The dam had been owned by a syndicate of mill owners who refused to pay for proper construction. The engineer who designed it had warned them it would fail. They built it anyway. When it broke, no one was held criminally responsible. The mill owners paid token settlements and moved on. The pattern was already clear in 1874. A small group of wealthy men, a poorly built dam, engineering warnings ignored, a working-class town wiped out below, a legal system unable to hold the rich accountable. In 1889, the same thing happened. Only this time the death toll was 16 times higher, and the men responsible were the most powerful capitalists in American history. Anna Fenn lived for many years after the flood. She remarried twice, first a man named Charles Barnes in 1894, then a Canadian lumberman named Samuel Maxwell in 1910. She lived in Johnstown most of her life. She had no more children. The 7 she lost on May 31, 1889, were the only children she would ever have. A friend recorded what Anna told her years later when asked how she carried on. "If God had spared me one, I could have been resigned, but all, Father in heaven, is not my cross heavier than I can bear." There is a national park at the site of the South Fork Dam today, the Johnstown Flood National Memorial, established by the U.S. National Park Service in 1969, 80 years after the disaster. You can walk the remains of the broken embankment. You can stand where Anna Fenn's roof began its 16-mile journey. You can read the names of the dead at the Grandview Cemetery in Johnstown, where 777 unidentified victims are buried in a single mass plot called the Plot of the Unknown Dead. The South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was never rebuilt. Its members quietly let the corporation dissolve. Most of their cottages were salvaged for lumber. A few of the men involved went on to greater fortunes. Carnegie sold his steel empire to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million and became the richest man in the world. Mellon became Secretary of the Treasury. Knox became a U.S. Senator. They all died in their beds, surrounded by family, decades after Johnstown. Anna Fenn died in 1939. She is buried at Grandview Cemetery, in sight of the rebuilt town. Her 7 children lie nearby. If you think this was an old story, a Gilded Age problem, something America has solved, consider November 8, 2018. A power line owned by Pacific Gas and Electric Company in Northern California failed in high winds. The transmission tower had been deferred from maintenance for years to save the company money. Inspectors had warned of failures. The company had ignored them. The failed line dropped sparks into dry grass. Within hours, the campfire was racing through the foothill town of Paradise, California. 85 people died, most of them elderly, most of them trapped in their cars trying to evacuate on a single 2-lane road. PG&E paid $16 billion in settlements. The corporation pleaded guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter, a historic legal moment. The first time a major American utility had been criminally convicted in such a case. Not a single executive went to prison, not one. The CEO, who had presided over the years of deferred maintenance, retired with a multi-million-dollar package. The company emerged from bankruptcy and continued operating. The dead remained dead. This is the lesson America has refused to learn for 150 years. Mill River, Johnstown, Paradise. The same story, century after century. Wealthy men cut corners. Working-class people die. Lawyers and engineers and judges find a way to call it nobody's fault. The corporation pays a fine that doesn't dent its valuation. The grieving families are told to move on. There is a portrait of Anna Fenn that survives in the archives of the Johnstown Area Heritage Association. A formal photograph taken in her later years. A small woman in a dark dress, hands folded in her lap. Eyes that have seen something the camera cannot capture. 7 children, 1 husband, 1 afternoon. She is the cost of a private fishing club. She is what 20 million tons of water looks like when it lands on a working-class town. She is the question that American law has never answered. When the dam breaks, who pays? 2,209 people died on May 31, 1889. They lived in Johnstown, in South Fork, in Woodvale, in Mineral Point, in East Conemaugh. They were steelworkers and tinsmiths and seamstresses and schoolchildren. They were Welsh and German and Irish and black. They were 8,000 miles from the Pittsburgh boardrooms where their fate was decided. Remember them: Anna Fenn, John Fenn. Their 7 children whose names are written in the Grandview Cemetery records. 777 unknown dead in the plot of the unknown dead. 99 entire families erased from the earth between 3:10 and 4:07 on a Friday afternoon in May. Andrew Carnegie built libraries. Henry Clay Frick built an art museum. Andrew Mellon donated his collection to start the National Gallery of Art. Their names are carved into marble all across America. Anna Fenn's name is on a small stone in Grandview Cemetery. Behind it, in the grass, are 7 smaller stones. I find forgotten disasters. I rebuild them with AI. You watch. You remember. Subscribe. They survived so you wouldn't forget.